All right, so I want to thank you for inviting me to share with you today about some of the climatic challenges of the Caribbean. For those of you who don't know me, and I just like to apologize, I have a little cold, but I hope it won't bother things too much. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Andrea Richards. I am a public archaeologist working in the Caribbean for many years. I'm Jamaican and also Barbadian as well. And I'm also a PhD researcher at Leiden University, where I'm hoping to, in a few months, wrap up my research, hoping everything will go well. Um, my research is actually on looking at specific cultural pathways to climate change action in the Caribbean, focusing on archaeology and traditional knowledge. So some of that is I'll include in my presentation today. So today, I won't only speak to you about how our sites are impacted. I will also first present on or give an overview of how, as a region, we are impacted by natural hazards. Some of it is climate induced, of course. I'll also look at some of our sites that are being impacted and start to wrap up with examples of how past populations adjusted to these changes in the region. And finally, look at some actions being taken today in different islands. All right, so the Caribbean is the second most vulnerable region to natural hazards in the world. We're right behind the small oceanic islands, where the archipelago between Fiji and Australia is acknowledged as the most prone to disasters, natural hazards. So within the Caribbean space, we're impacted by seismic activity. We can remember the case of that very powerful Haiti earthquake. Throughout the region, we're also still having, because of plate boundaries, we're having lots of seismic activity going on even now. The region is impacted by volcanic activity as well. There are over 20 plus volcanoes in the Caribbean. La Soufrière erupted last in 2021. Soufrière Hills in Montserrat is still in an active phase, and we have the underwater volcano known as Kikemjeni off the coast of Grenada. We're also severely impacted by droughts, and we have specific water poor countries in the region, such as Antigua and Barbuda and Barbados. We've been impacted by paleo tsunamis in the past. We have 88 recorded from 1489. And for those of you who live in those areas of the US where tropical cyclones also impact you, know of some of these strong hurricanes or storms that cause strong winds, torrential rain, storm surges, flooding, and many other issues in our cities. We also have climate change, which is resulting in severe shifts and erratic changes in precipitation and storm events in the region. Coastal geomorphological changes and sea level rise will continue to increase. We have inundation of our coastal communities and historic towns, and in the region, about 90% of our historic towns are coastal. And of course, the archaeological record that is present is on in our coastal areas as well. So our region is not new to the effects of the changing climate. The region has been exposed to these challenges, especially with water or severe weather events since the earliest occupation. This has manifested itself through alternating periods of extreme dry and wet conditions, cyclones and storm surges, and other activities. Of course, continuous adaptation by past populations to the present day is going on, and I'll present some of that later on. And water was readily available on some volcanic islands, such as Dominica, but virtually absent on most of the coral limestone islands, such as Barbados, or challenges with accessing water in Barbados, Bahamas, Antigua, and Barbuda. Just to provide an overview of how some of the different hazards impact the different islands, you'll be able to see basically reflected how tsunamis, drought, flood, landslide, volcanic activity, earthquake, and hurricanes are spread across the different islands in terms of how they are impacted. This is a slide from I almost said Australia, from Antigua, Antigua and Barbuda, but specifically Antigua, where you can see how they have documented in the historical record how they've been impacted by droughts. And this island was particularly impacted by severe droughts and long droughts, and many of them. So you can see as the years pass, and even how soon after one drought, the next one would come. And you see instances where even with the first one where they say drought reaches emergency stage, or they have asked for public fasting in relation to the long drought, or in cases where how many persons have died as a result of the drought. And this was also an island that was planting sugarcane at that time. So drought was like a really significant or really critical part of the life of persons on those islands and how they had to manage them. This is just an example of what was an area in Dominica after Hurricane Maria in 2017. And Maria was a really powerful hurricane, a Category 5, similar to Irma that also happened that year, and Jose, and I think several other very strong storms that year. And I mean, when you look at Dominica afterwards, and Dominica is a very lush island, it looked like acid rain had just been poured over the landscape, and persons lost a lot as a result. And this is something that is common throughout the region. This is an image from the historic inner city of Paramaribo in Suriname, where they have they're now experiencing flooding events with such they're so common now. Tide issues and this is a wooden city, so you can imagine with frequent flooding events and having to endure issues with how the wood will react to the wet and dry cycles. These are very critical areas for us to consider. Also, because a lot of the vernacular architecture of the region is still standing in a lot of our historic cores, and so this is also really important for us to consider as we expect that changes will continue, and we will also have to continue experiencing these severe fluctuations. This is an image from Nelson's Dockyard. And if you don't know Nelson's Dockyard, it's a site in Antigua. It's their premier tourist attraction. And this map looks at flood hazard in the site. It's also a World Heritage Site, but this map looks at the flood hazard in the site. And I mean, I'll point out to the lack of work happening with some of our sites later on. But this is one of the sites where a lot has taken place in relation to how they have gone about mapping the issues that they're having and really approaching it from a data-driven perspective in how they're looking for solutions. When we turn now to earthquakes that impact the region, this was a Holy Trinity Episcopal Cathedral. 6 times it's been destroyed by fire and the 7th by earthquake. We're not sure what the next time will result in, but these are some of the experiences that Haiti has to go through on a regular basis. This is a map from Port Royal in Jamaica, and you may know about the underwater city in Port Royal. You can see from the image where it's showing the 1692 shoreline. So they had a very powerful earthquake in 1692, and essentially a portion of the town, a significant portion of the town, slipped under the waters. Today, we've had a lot of excavation done in Port Royal over the years. A lot of work by Texas A&M University in particular. And a lot of artifacts have been brought up. But here, you can just see the shoreline after the earthquake and the present shoreline. Of course, this is an area that is still being built up in, so it is prone to other issues as well. Even though earthquake was what causes significant damage, there are many other issues to consider for Port Royal. When we turn to volcanic issues in the region, this presents an information on the different volcanoes that are in the region, and they describe the volcanoes as being very much live. So for example, Dominica has a significant number of volcanoes. We know that in Montserrat, their last eruption was 1995, but their half of the country is still very much uninhabitable. And the volcano is still in an active, described as being in an active phase. And I mentioned that the volcano in St. Vincent, La Soufrière, had last erupted in 2021. And prior to that, it had erupted in the 1970s. And the ash from St. Vincent impacted Barbados so significantly. And Barbados is to the east of St. Vincent. And the Barbados was essentially covered in ash. So you can only imagine what persons living in St. Vincent were experiencing. And I'll show you some images of that later on. And Mount Pelée in Martinique, which was described as a really significant eruption for the 20th century. For this volcanic eruption, almost 30,000 persons died in St. Pierre. And it is said that one man survived this eruption, who later joined the circus and continued to tell the tale. His name was Ludger Silbaris. And but this is a reality for us, this very small region of the world. I'd mentioned to you about the volcanic eruptions in Montserrat. Because parts of the town or the country essentially is buried, they've described it as a modern Pompeii. But the mountain is also claiming back the areas around in proximity to it. This is St. Vincent after the eruption of La Soufrière. And you basically see how it's been covered by the ashfall. I show you this image that we're on right now is the town of Sandy Bay in St. Vincent. And I'm particularly interested in showing this image to you because Sandy Bay is a community. Well, this is actually New Sandy Bay. The previous Sandy Bay community had been relocated because the town had been largely destroyed or severely impacted by storm events. And so they moved it to this new location, not a very smart decision, but they moved it to this new location, which has them essentially at the foot of the volcano. And as you can see, this is a coastal community. And Sandy Bay is a community where a lot of the Kalinago, who are the indigenous people still remaining in the Eastern Caribbean, they live many of them still live in this community. Just as a point of note, Dominica has another significant number of Kalinago community. There are about 3,000 persons living in Dominica. So this is the Kalinago community in St. Vincent. And when I was doing research in this community, persons spoke freely about the cycle that they had found themselves in with a volcanic eruption, because La Soufrière erupts more frequently than the other volcanoes in the region. And the fact that the volcano builds up their coastline, the volcanic eruption builds up their coastline, and then hurricanes and other effects basically remove the coastline. And this is the context that they find themselves in, which is why it was identified as such an interesting area to study in. I'm going to show you a map later on where the community members actually developed that map when they were trying to be more proactive in how they were responding to the issues with climate change. This is a site, Fort Berkeley in Antigua, where and many of our forts are either in the sea right now or approaching the sea. They're at sea level, and we're having significant parts being eroded. into the sea, collapsing into the sea. Likewise here with Maycock's fort in Barbados, where it's at sea level, and we're basically watching the sea move closer to the site. Likewise with the Eystons fort, also in Barbados, we can see parts of it already in the water. And if you look towards the right, you'll see those are actually cannons that are in the water that they have not removed. Back to the Nelson's Dockyard site, this map was done, this image was developed to indicate predicted sea level rise, how it would impact the site to 2090. And you can see the areas, and they're based on the color coding, there are different parts of the site, and how they are likely to be affected based on different levels of sea level rise. As I said, this is one site where they're actually being very proactive in what they're doing. They've already started to elevate some areas. They're looking at how water is pulled away from the site. So an example for us in the region to study some more. We have, unfortunately, pre-Columbian burials that are being eroded out into the sea. We've lost some already. This is from a site in Grenada, and also in Grenada, where historic cemeteries are being broken up by coastal flooding, and persons are being and persons who have been buried are there. These graves are being impacted as a result. This is the site of Brighton Beach in St. Vincent, and it's a site that is impacted by sand mining issues, which has exacerbated issues with climate-induced hazards. So here, and this is a very important site to the Kalinago people in the Eastern Caribbean, but they're essentially watching the site eroding into the sea. There has been some rescue archaeology, but a lot of it has, a lot remains to be done at the site. The persons that you're seeing in the image, the first one to the lower part of the screen is from the Kalinago community in St. Vincent, and the one further is the Kalinago community in Dominica, where they came over and were trying to offer support with the teams that were there to excavate the site or to conduct the rescue work at the site. Here is the Antigua, a site in Antigua called Winthorpe's, where if you look out to the rocks that are to the sea, the site had been excavated to that area. And as you can see, the sea is starting to come into the site, and this is expected to continue. They've done some hard engineering work along parts of the coastline, where they're seeing like beach areas being built up. But as you know, with these engineering works, they tend to degrade other areas along the coastline. And I don't think we have done sufficient studies in the region that that indicate just how much when these works are done, you know, how it impacts other areas of the coastline. And of course, this will have serious implications for archaeological sites, some of which might not be known. I wanted to switch to talking quickly about some of the adaptation strategies that were identified from archaeological research or other research in the region. So the first image looks at pot stack technology, which has been found in some islands such as Carriacou and Mustique, Barbados, where the pot stack technology was used to obtain fresh water in saltwater context. And this was used, they found a lot of this technology in Barbados in particular, by Peter Jewett in his work in a few decades ago. Then below that is, I hope the image is very clear. It's a historic well. These are still very much being used in Barbuda, and they form part of the adaptation of the population there. These wells were being used from historic times and are still being used today to provide water for Barbudans. In the middle is an adaptive method that was used in Antigua. And as I mentioned before, Antigua is prone to water issues. And so they've had to use a variety of methods to ensure that they have water when drought occurs. So this method was one that they used, where they would dig wells in the center or the lowest point of the largest ponds and build walls to the surface level. The image over to the next side is actually one of the huge water catchment areas that they built in Antigua. And they also depended a lot on dams and cisterns to capture rainwater and other things, because this has just become the way of life for them in Antigua. The image below, the middle one is a research being done to excavate the same pot stag that I mentioned to you earlier. And the conch shell that you see to the right is also one way that, are identified as one way that pre-Columbian populations used to collect water or obtain water in drier times. Then to draw your attention to some specific other adaptation strategies that were used. The image to the left was produced by the team working at Ans a la Gourde in Guadeloupe, where they basically documented how the settlement had a change in location in response to sea level rise over time. The image to the right is where they have mapped the coastline in Morel in Guadeloupe to show how the coastline has changed over time. And these research like this, they're not very common in the region, but nevertheless, they're very critical for us in understanding these changes from the past and also what implications there might be for the future. One of the adaptation strategies that was used by from the past was how houses were constructed. And here, one of the things that was specifically mentioned was how houses were anchored in the ground. And they've had very deep post holes that they were able to identify in the archaeological record. And how the houses were built, which is what I'll go to next, which is from Dominica, where there have been numerous reports that have been done on how the A-frame technology or house building for the roof has been able to deal with the uplift during hurricanes so that they would not lose the houses. And of course, they relied heavily on using local resource materials, and so were able to rebuild quickly after the passage of a strong hurricane. This map is again turning back to the Sandy Bay community in St. Vincent. They realized that they were not being included very much in whatever consultations were being taken about what was happening in the coastal areas and how the government was looking to protect the coastal area. And so they look to build to develop their maps to show that they're using their local knowledge to contribute to the process. So they started to document what they had lost and where and when they had lost this, so that they were able to perhaps get an entry point into the discussions that were or consultations that were taking place. As the consultations tended to focus only on, yes, we're relocating you as a community, or we're relocating you to this part, but not much on how their local knowledge was important to whatever actions were being done to safeguard these coastal spaces. Some of the other activities that are presently being done, this is also in the Kalinago territory in Dominica, where we've started to work with the Kalinago community, and particularly children at the schools within the community. And here, we started a drone mapping project. So the council had received a drone from UNDP, not being used much. So we decided to, partner with them to bring out the school kids and do some work and to get them interested in how sites were changing and how they could see their place in effecting actions that were needed in relation to the changes that were taking place and that would likely impact them. Another component of this was that we started looking at community stories in relation to how they were experiencing loss, coastal loss, and the stories that they could remember from their past about how areas were changing. And this is something that we're hoping to continue with into the future. Another project that is being implemented in the region, and this is being implemented by Sophia Perdicaris, who is at Lincoln and Nebraska University. I think that's the correct name. But it's her project in Barbuda. And as a component of this that I wanted to highlight is that because they're pursuing this from a historical ecological approach, and they were also working with the elders in the community and also with the school age kids, for them to speak to the elders about the oral traditions and the practices that were relevant to how water was managed in the past, and what they could learn for this generation and how they would deal with issues moving into the future. So that's been a very important project in the region. I think important to highlight. Again, Barbuda, one of the islands that was also impacted by water. Limited water. A project also that I wanted to highlight is St. Kitts and Nevis, but specifically on St. Kitts, where a project in 2018, I believe, they were documenting erosion processes at archaeological sites, and they were using satellite imagery and ArcGIS. What is important about this project, though, is that they were making it a collaborative one between different partners that would be very important to safeguarding these sites. And the data they got from this project was put into a database that was supposed to guide decision makers in moving forward in how they plan for coastal areas. Particularly, the fact that data is often missing from some of the decisions that are being taken. And certainly, archaeology data is not included very much. So this project was sort of a first in the region. We're not sure how extensive the policymakers are using the data, and that is something that we should probably follow up on. I think important to follow up on. So something for the future. But one way in which you're using different data sources to plan for the future, and this is important particularly in our coastal areas, and I think certainly needed for how we look at integrated coastal zone management in the region, because many of our islands, a significant portion of these islands are within the coastal zone space. Another project I'd highlight that was funded by the U.S. Ambassador's Fund for Cultural Preservation was the Resilient Heritage Trinidad and Tobago project. Here, they were able to do a vulnerability assessment of key areas in two areas, Port of Spain and then also in Nelson's Island. So they were able to focus on documentation, conservation, and looking at what they needed to prioritize moving forward. This is very important because, and why I want to highlight this is because many of how we look at dealing with projects such as these in the region is it uses a lot of external funding sources. So when these are finished, very much activities that are left to that need to be done to continue to monitor these areas, they're not anchored in a program that is able to sustain them. And so we basically end up going back to ground zero because, as you know, data is constantly evolving, especially when you're looking at changes in coastal areas. So it certainly cannot be approached from having a project for a while that it does not support further data being generated. So our problem in the region is that we need to approach climate change issues with our sites from a multidisciplinary approach. So we need to combine different data sources in relation to the work that is being done. Unfortunately, within the region, we have frameworks where legislation is limited in the sense that they are poorly implemented. They're not very up to date, in the sense that they don't really deal with emerging issues at sites, certainly not climate change issues. And we have limited capacity in the region in terms of financial capacity and also with human capacity. There are trained archaeologists, of course, in the region, but sometimes they're really stretched in dealing with other issues, largely development issues that are coming up in the region. And so sometimes climate change is something that is not being addressed sufficiently, in the sense that we're not going out, we're not checking sites, for example, sites that have been checked decades ago, that were surveyed decades ago. We don't know the status of some of these sites. So as you can see, this is a very serious issue for us in the region. So we're really in need of developing better strategies. But in order to develop better strategies, we need to be collecting data in order to do this. And so this really has to be taken as a national approach, even if it's something as simple as developing a strategy for how we're dealing with archaeological or built heritage in our islands. We really have to take the steps to do something and begin somewhere. A point I wanted to end with is that an issue that has been coming up as a result of climate change issues and more storms. We're seeing this emerging issue of disaster capitalism, where persons in communities on islands, when they are impacted by these storms or any other natural hazard, they're being removed from their community spaces, and the government basically goes in afterwards and does development. And these persons have lost their connection to their land. And as you know, this will cause serious disruptions in the transmission of local knowledge, for example, where there is a connection with the landscape. This is a historical process in the region. It has been happening over the years, whenever, from colonial times, whenever communities experienced either a volcanic eruption, a serious hurricane, or any other severe natural hazard, they were relocated to other spaces, and this is something that continues. In this case, in the case in Barbuda, they're basically wanting to convert the island into a large tourist resort, and so all those persons that are basically struggling in having the land that they used to have, this has been reduced because it was a communal system of land ownership. And so this has been impacted as a result of the decision that the government has made, because they have since repealed the Land Act that governed the distribution of land on that island. So just an issue that I wanted to raise as I close. And so with that, I just say thank you for listening, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.